Hello and welcome to Knitting 101 Techniques Untangled, where we will cover 8 key skills to give you more confidence in your knitting. In this video, we'll be covering fixing mistakes, so those drop stitches will be a pesky thing of the past. So in this little swatch, I've dropped a few stitches. So you can see here, poor little stitch dropped, and I've got some ladders. So what I like to do is use an open stitch marker. These are the Coconuts opening coloured stitch markers, and you can clip them on. So I've got another drop stitch here, and I clip them on into the loop so that it doesn't go running off further down. This is really good if you've noticed a drop stitch and you are not yet there in your knitting. You can just clip the stitch marker on. It will hold it in place until you get to that point. So I've already knit to the point where my drop stitch is. So I'm going to take this stitch marker off, and then I'm going to take a crochet hook. In this case I am using the Coconut Stitch Fixer, which is really nice. It's got a hook on each end. I'm going to hook it into my stitch. So I'm going to work it on the right side, so how to do it with a knit stitch first. So put it in and you'll see the bars or the ladders of where the stitch is missed. So you're going to grab your hook and put it underneath the bar so that you can pull it through almost like you would when you're knitting. So I've knit essentially one stitch, so I'm going to keep going up one bar at a time. And this is something you can do even if you don't know how to crochet well. This is what it's all about. Now I'm going to put it back onto the needle. You want to make sure you put it in the same direction as the other stitches. So I'm going to turn it slightly to the right, to the left. So I turned it slightly to the left so it's aligned like my other stitches on the needle. So they're all facing the same way, so that when you start knitting, you'll see it's like nothing has happened. Stitches back in place. So now we're going to look at picking up our drop stitch from the wrong side or a purl side. So again, I've got my stitch marker holding my drop stitch in place. I'll pop this off, and again I'm going to use the stitch fixer. So this time you want to make sure your bars are coming in front of your drop stitch so that you create a nice purl stitch. So the nice benefit of this being double-ended is you can go underneath and kind of pull it to the other side. So I've got my stitch here, the bar or ladder is in the front, and this time I'm going to pull it from front to back through, so I've made a purl stitch. Again, you can also just move the ladder in front, that's easier. Pull it through. Sometimes a little bit more fiddly on the wrong side. Get this final one. And you want to make sure you're pulling one ladder at a time in line with your rows. So I've now popped that stitch all the way to the top. I'm going to slide it onto the needle, so you'll see it's all nicely there. If you're worried about it feeling a bit tight or loose, blocking does help with evening out the tension. So here I've got a swatch with a drop stitch in garter stitch. So again, holding my drop stitch in place with a nice stitch marker, which I will pop off. So this is when the stitch fixer is really useful, having those double-ended hooks when you need to switch back and forth between a knit and a purl stitch. So with garter stitch, when you're picking it up, you want to just check what stitch you need to do, whether it's a knit or a purl. So in this one, my drop stitch finished on a purl, so the next one is going to be a knit. So I'm pulling my loop, my ladder, into the loop from the back to make a knit. Now I'm going to slide the stitch fixer underneath with the other hook, pull stitch behind, and then I'm going to grab, so my ladder or bar is in the front, and then pull that through so I get a purl. So now that I've done a knit followed by a purl, I will do a knit again so I can get my garter stitch, so pulling it from behind. So in this swatch I've been doing some stockinette, but I accidentally put a few mistaken purl stitches. So I'm going to undo up to this purl stitch, and actually the whole row here, just to show you how to unpick really easily on the needle. So I like to do this if I'm only having to go back a little bit, so then not in the worry of dropping any stitches. So what you want to do is stick your needle into the stitch before you pull out the yarn. So I'm going to exaggerate a little bit. So I'm going to stick my left needle into the stitch below and then slide the stitch off the right needle, and then you can pull your yarn out. This is a nice way of undoing your knitting so that you're not losing any stitches. It keeps it all safe. So I'm just going to quickly undo along. So there's that pesky purl stitch. Just undo it, and undoing it this way, it keeps your stitches facing the right direction so you don't get any twisted stitches. So I'm just going to undo to the point where I actually did another purl stitch in my nice stockinette. So I did a purl stitch a row down. So instead of having to keep unpicking and going back, what you can do is purposely ladder or drop a stitch. So I'm going to drop this stitch where a row or two down I've done a purl. So I'm going to take it off the needle and with my stitch fixer grab the bars in between and make that ladder. So there's that purl stitch. I'm going to undo it to the point where it was right, and then just like our drop stitches, I'm going to go back and pick it up correctly. So I'm going to make them a knit and twist it back onto the needle properly. So then it's all nice and perfect again. So when you're knitting something a bit complicated, an interesting stitch pattern, so lace, brioche, cables even, what you can do to avoid making more mistakes is adding a lifeline. So in this case, I've just done one repeat of this lace pattern and I've finished. So I'm going to put a lifeline in, so if I make a mistake, I can come back to where it's correct. So a lifeline is basically taking some waste yarn. Some people use finer thread, so embroidery thread or even floss. I'm going to use some nice contrasting waste yarn. So I've got this blue yarn, so I'm going to thread it through my tapestry needle. This is a nice bent tip tapestry needle from Coco Knits. So I'm going to thread it through. And what you're going to do is take your tapestry needle. I'm going to keep the stitches on my needle and run this through the stitches. So I'm just going to pull it through each one all the way across. You don't want it super thick because you don't want it to mess with your tension, so it doesn't need to be chunky or anything, but you want it noticeable. So I just threaded it through and it's just going to hang out there, and then you would carry on knitting. So if you've made a mistake somewhere along the way, you can rip back, and what the lifeline does is it keeps the last point where it was nice and correct in place, and so when you rip back and you get to that point, those stitches are really easy to pick up again. I hope this video has calmed your nerves so that you know now everything is fixable. There are loads of other great videos in this series, so please do check them out. Thank you for watching and happy knitting.